So it's 1994. The World Cup is in America for the first time. Not for the first time. Money would be leading the way. The Americans only got the World Cup on the promise they would make their own major professional league, with the North American Soccer League folding in 1984 and minor league soccer things happening. The U.S. weren't ready. In fact, MLS, Major League Soccer, wouldn't be available until 1996. But still, a promise was a promise, and the Americans got the World Cup. The Americans had the razzmatazz. The 94 World Cup is still the highest attended World Cup ever by average attendance per match. And it came in a competition that had 24 teams, not 32. So it's strange how the Americans would seem to pull rabbits out of their hat. And they had an interesting final, although Baggio's tellingness was huge. But can you imagine qualifying for the World Cup where there's only 24 spots in it and the fights for every inch of space? Now, a lot of people say that, 2017 potentially could be the biggest qualification blunders ever because of Italy, Holland, and the United States, among others, not making the World Cup. But what if I told you that the U.S. Razzmatazz World Cup of 94 had its share of qualification gases? And the fact of the matter is, it wasn't just three countries. There were interesting stories of teams that didn't make the World Cup, more so than teams that made it. This is the story of the 1984 World Cup qualification tournament. For all the qualification stories that come from previous World Cups, in my mind, the 1994 qualifying campaign would be one of the biggest ever. I mean, not only, you didn't have like the super heavyweights that missed out in 2017, like Italy, Chile, Holland, and the U.S. And everyone thinks 2017 was a crazy qualifier. But when you look at these in 1994, when I researched this, you know that not one, but all six continents, minus Antarctica, mind you, had a story of a team that didn't make the tournament. Whereas, it was bigger than the teams that made the tournament, if you will. But every continent had a different story to tell. And in one story, three continents combined for one super story. So stay tuned. This should be interesting. Our first continental story takes place in Asia. The lesser of the countries. So anyway, Asia had 2 spots out of 24. 29 countries went for 2 spots. The final round of qualification is that it was down to 6 teams. Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan, Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. Surprised North Korea could get it that far. But good news for the U.S. because, they were scared about Iran, North Korea, and Iraq qualifying. All that. Those 3 countries were the bottom 3. North Korea did win 1 game out of 5. So Japan needed to play Iraq. South Korea won 3-0. And Saudi Arabia won 4-3 against Iran. So Japan had to face Iraq. This was huge. Japan, all they had to do was win, and they would have knocked South Korea out of the World Cup. And, they're rivals and all that. So, anyway, it was huge and all that. So headed to the final match, Japan and Saudi Arabia were on top with 5 points each. So it meant that Japan and Saudi Arabia would qualify and all that. It was simultaneous. It was South Korea versus North Korea and Saudi Arabia versus Iran. Japan would start on a goal by Kazuyoshi Miura, but somehow Iraq's Rahi Janashil scored to tie the game at 1. However, Masashi Nakayama scored to make it 2-1. And with only a few minutes left until the end of the game, Japan looked like they were going to be assured to win, and with Saudi Arabia winning their game too. So it'd be Japan and Saudi Arabia coming from Asia. However, Japan knew they had to hold on to the score. Unfortunately, Japan gave the ball up to Iraq, And then, off of a corner kick, Jafar Amrin scored to tie it at 2. Iraq did not get the win they needed to qualify for the World Cup because they needed a win. But Japan shockingly lost. It was like unbelievable. Japan, all they had to do was hang on to that 2-1 lead, but Iraq got them. And Japan fell into 3rd place. By goal differential, Korea jumped in ahead of Japan. So this was just terrible and all that. However, this would actually be known in Japan as the Agony of Doha, or as it is romanized, Doha no Higeki. South Korea says it was the miracle of Doha. Japan had everything going for them. They had the J League starting, and Japan had never been that close to qualification. But the good news about Japan's faltering was that Japan, since '94, has not failed to make a World Cup. They've been to every World Cup, and now they're in the one in 2022. So Japan has been to every World Cup since 1998. So in a way, that loss made them look so much better and all that. All right, so that is that part. Now you'll have to follow along with this story because it says North America, South America, and Oceania, basically their qualifying tournaments would lead to one World Cup qualifying story. Follow me on this. Okay, so Australia easily won the Oceania group and would have to wait for the North American team to face off in the playoff. So with the Americans qualifying, CONCACAF was given 2.25 spots. The U.S. had 1 spot, and then 1.25 spots. There would be 3 qualification rounds and all that. In the second round, the 8 teams who made it through the Caribbean and Central American zone would be in 2 groups of 4 teams each. Home and away, the group winners and the runners-up would advance to the final round. So that would mean 4 teams would face each other off. Puerto Rico beat the Dominican Republic. St. Vincent beat St. Lucia. Bermuda defeated Haiti on away goals. Jamaica beat Puerto Rico. Antigua beat Netherlands Antilles. Suriname beat Guyana. Trinidad beat Barbados. And St. Vincent's advanced to the first major round. Bermuda would beat Antigua. Jamaica would beat Trinidad. St. Vincent would beat Suriname. In Central America, Honduras beat Guatemala. El Salvador beat Nicaragua. Their major rivals. And Costa Rica would beat Panama. So in the second round, Mexico and Honduras would qualify from their group with Costa Rica and St. Vincent to the Final Four. Canada and El Salvador would join them too. Canada only losing once out of their 6 qualifying matches with El Salvador, Jamaica, and Bermuda. In the final round, Canada, Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras. Whoever was number 1 would get a spot in the World Cup. Whoever number 2 is would have to go through a playoff round and all that. Canada was 3-2-1, not bad, but Mexico, fresh off things, only went 5-1. Their only loss was to El Salvador on the first day. So Canada, try as they might, just couldn't do it. But thankfully, they were better than El Salvador and Honduras and got to go to a playoff to deal with Australia. And both teams won 2-1 on home turf. So that meant Canada and Australia could not be decided by away goals or any other tiebreaker. So they had to go through penalty kicks in Australia. And needless to say, Canada suffered just like what England suffers at times. World Cup qualification or World Cup penalty shootout jitters. Canada botched it to Australia, and Australia was going to go on to the World Cup. Not so fast. Australia may have taken down Canada, but they would have to wait for a South American team to qualify. So that was huge. Now, in South America, there were 9 countries going for the World Cup. Now, it would have been 10, but Chile, because they had some argy-bargy to try to screw Brazil over in the 1990 qualification round, and it didn't work, and they got themselves booted. So there were 9 countries. One group would have 5 countries, one would have 4. What they decided was that both group winners would qualify for the World Cup. But whoever came second in the 5-team competition, which was Group B, would get into the World Cup too. Whereas the second place team in Group A would have to play through the tiebreaker and subsequently face the winner of the CONCACAF Oceania playoff, which of course was Australia. So in Group B, Brazil and Bolivia did it. Bolivia shocked a lot of people. Marco Echeverri is a pretty good player, but Bolivia over Uruguay? That's a shocker. So Brazil won the group, Bolivia took second, and Uruguay took third. Uruguay was out of luck. In Group A, it was Colombia, Argentina, Paraguay, and Peru. A lot of people said it would be down to Colombia and Argentina for that one automatic spot, and the loser would get the benefit of a playoff. The only problem was it wasn't the country that people thought it was. It was Colombia, who went 4-0-2 in qualifying. That's right. Colombia on home turf beat Argentina August 1993 2-1. That was good, but that does not compare to the final South American game on September 5th, 1993. That's Argentina on home turf at Estadio Monumental, home to the 1978 World Cup final in Buenos Aires, losing 5-0 to Colombia. Rincon with 2 goals, Asprilla with 2, Valencia with 1. Argentina got crushed by Colombia 5-0. That is just shocking. And the funny thing about Colombia is that their talisman goalie, Rene Higuita, wasn't even on the team because he was in jail for being part of a drug thing. So that was just terrible. Argentina would have to go to that playoff. So in a sense, that Canada losing Australia was actually the best thing that would happen to Canada, because that meant that they didn't have to worry about Argentina in qualifying. So Australia faced Argentina. But Australia did tie Argentina in the first leg of the 2-leg match 1-1. But Argentina went on to win 1-0 in the second leg and took out Australia and got themselves to the World Cup anyhow. That was also when Diego Maradona decided to help Argentina after the embarrassment on home turf against Colombia. He decided to don the number 10 and train and play for Argentina in the World Cup. It worked out well. He helped Argentina get to the World Cup. But the bad news was he failed his drug test for ephedrine after the second group match. And Argentina basically fell apart from there. So that's what happened. So let's go to the next qualifying story. And this is Africa. You're thinking Africa couldn't have had a big qualifying story. Well, you would be wrong, man. Very wrong. So in qualification in Africa, the 36 African teams were rejoined into 9 groups of 4. Africa was given 3 spots in the World Cup in the U.S. So 9 groups of 4. The group winners would go on to the second round of qualification. And those teams were Algeria, Cameroon, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Morocco, Senegal, and and Guinea. I know it doesn't seem right. Yeah, Gambia and Mali actually, withdrew. But yeah, Guinea over Kenya. So it's time for the second round and all that. 3 groups of 3. You win your group, you're safe. So Group A saw Nigeria with 5 points qualified. They actually had the same amount of points as Ivory Coast, but because of goal differential, Nigeria qualified and did well in the 94 World Cup. Group B saw the big one. But anyway, Group C saw Cameroon jump in over Zimbabwe and Guinea. So that's huge. But there would be one major problem. On April 27, 1993, Zambia would be shocked, as most of the Zambian national team was going to fly to Dakar to face Senegal in a qualifying match. Every passenger and crew member died, so the Zambian national team was decimated in a way. Fortunately, though, there were some main players that didn't join the team because they were off playing otherwise. Their captain, Kalusha Balila, was actually playing for PSV Eindhoven in Holland and would actually make separate arrangements to go to Senegal. Charles Bozunda was playing for Anderlecht in Belgium. And Johnson Balila was playing for a Swiss club. So anyway, yeah, it was just humongous and all that. So they did everything they could. So of course, you know, they were supposed to play Senegal in the first game and all that. Well, the second game of qualification after Morocco beat Senegal. So Zambia was supposed to join in and play Senegal. That was postponed till August 93. However, Zambia rebuilt their team with their guys that were over in Europe and also other domestic players and beat Morocco on home turf in Zambia 2-1 on the 4th of July 1993. Zambia would then tie Senegal 0-0, crush Senegal into fine powder 4-0, and face Morocco. Final game of the qualifications. Zambia had 5 points, Morocco had 4 in the 3-team group. All Zambia needed was a tie or a win, but a win or a tie, Zambia would have shocked everyone by not only making the World Cup for African team for the first time ever for their nation, but to do it when their team was decimated by a plane crash. It would have been like one of the biggest Cinderella stories ever. It would have been a bigger Cinderella story than Manchester United after they lost many of their players from the 1958 squad. It took them like 10 years to win a European championship. But imagine a national team having the big shock and then faltering big. Italy didn't qualify for the 1950 World Cup because, you know, a lot of their players, national players, died in that Torino accident in 1949. Unfortunately for Zambia, the Cinderella story ended in the 62nd minute on a goal by Lacrisi. Morocco was in the World Cup, and Zambia, despite everything that had gone wrong with that country and that qualification campaign, were just inches away from making the World Cup and becoming one of the greatest stories in World Cup history. Just wasn't meant to be. Now, Zambia did win the 2012 African Nations tournament, like the African Nations Cup, which was just close to the crash site of their 93 accident. But yeah, that was just shocking. Which brings us to our last World Cup qualification story, UEFA, as in Europe. 39 teams would enter qualification for the World Cup. Liechtenstein would withdraw. And then, of course, you know, you had the breakup of Russia into so many different countries. So the CIS/Russia had to take the Soviet Union spot because the Soviet Union dissolved. And FIFA still was suspending Yugoslavia because of their Yugoslav wars problem. That was so big that Yugoslavia was supposed to be in Euro 1992, but had to be disqualified. And the second place team in their qualification group, Denmark, with 10 days' notice, got into the Euro and won the whole thing in the butt end of it. Germany, well, there were 13 UEFA teams that would qualify for the World Cup. The thing is, Germany was the defending champions, and at that time, both the defending champions and hosts got to go to the World Cup, whereas now, qualified for the World Cup. As is now, it's only the host nation. The defending champs have to compete. So anyway, there would be 6 groups. 5 groups with 6 and 1 of 7. And all that. All group winners and runners-up would qualify. So 6 groups. Every group, top 2. Group 1 saw a huge shift as Italy and Switzerland both won group from Group 1. Portugal were oh so close, 6-2-2. Portugal had some troubles qualifying for the World Cup. They weren't the decent superpowers they were qualifying for the World Cup since 2002. Scotland ended up 4th. Group 5 saw Greece and Russia easily qualify through, with a group that had Iceland, Hungary, Luxembourg, and was supposed to have Yugoslavia, but because of the UN sanctions, they couldn't play. So they ended up not happening. But the other 4 groups had major stories to tell. So this is the ranking of the weirdest qualification days. November 1993. November 17th, 1993. Which ironically is 29 years and a day after. Well, this video is being taken 29 years and a day after the craziness of November 17th, 1993. This is craziness from 4 to 1. At number 4, you had Wales. So the final day, Wales was playing Romania on home turf. All they needed to do was avoid embarrassment, and they were going to the World Cup. This would be huge and all that. So in Group 4, you had Romania, Belgium, RCS, aka the representation of Czechs and Slovaks, because, you know, Czechoslovakia split during the qualification tournament. Wales, Cyprus, and the Faroe Islands. So it's down to the final day, November 17th. Belgium would tie the Czechs, but it didn't matter. They were in. Well, they were kind of in. The Welsh needed to beat Romania to sneak in ahead of Romania. And they were down 1-0 on a goal by George Hagi over Neville Southall. Wales had a chance on a penalty. And instead of Ian Rush or Gary Speed taking the penalty, they went with Dean Saunders. But thankfully for Saunders, he scored 1-1 tie. And the Welsh were happy. All they needed to do was hang on, or basically score the winning goal. Unfortunately, Romania would score a goal by Radioku. The score, Romania was in the World Cup, Wales was out. So Romania and Belgium qualified for the 94 World Cup. Romania made a surprise run to the semifinals. So that was one of the biggest shocks around. At number 3, you had England's failure at the 94 World Cup. And you thought that I was going to name it number 1 because, you know, I'm an England fan. No. England were in a group with Norway, the Netherlands, Poland, Turkey, and San Marino. England completely crapped the bed, if you will. They stupidly tied Norway on home turf 1-1. They tied the Dutch on home turf 2-2, which isn't that bad. But they went to Poland and tied them when they should have won. And then they went to Norway, Oslo, June 1993, and got shocked 2-0. That was the end of it. A few terrible results later, England knew that they had to crush San Marino into fine powder and hope that the Dutch would falter in Poland. So anyway, England did their job. They crushed San Marino 7-1. Holland won the game 3-1. So Holland won anyhow. So that meant that Norway, surprise, surprise, would be going to the World Cup alongside the Dutch. Like, I don't hate Norway as much. I'm just saying Norway's a Nordic country. As is. Well, England needed to win by 7 goals. But the weird thing is the one goal they gave up was in the first 30 seconds as Stuart Pearce made a terrible back pass that was supposed to go to David Seaman. But unfortunately, David Gillatari put it in the net and San Marino had the 1-0 lead. England did score 7 goals, but Ian Wright had 4 goals. But, you know, Ian Wright didn't do that much internationally. So England were not in the World Cup. But this was the last time, as of this World Cup, that they had failed to make the World Cup. So, in a sense, that was good. Anyway, it was number 2. Number 2 for the European story was Denmark and the Irish. So Denmark were the European champions. They were put in a group with Spain, Ireland, Northern Ireland, well, the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Albania. Well, we kind of knew that Lithuania, Latvia, and Albania were nowhere to be found. However, on the final day, it was down to 2 key games. It was the Battle of Ireland, Republic versus the North, and Spain versus Denmark, simultaneously happening. Northern Ireland needed some help, needed to do something. Unfortunately, Jimmy Quinn scored in the 74th minute in Belfast, and Northern Ireland looked like they were going to knock out Ireland and help Spain and Denmark, for that matter, get into the World Cup. However, a key goal by Alan McLaughlin in the 78th minute tied the game at 1, and Ireland had their tie, which actually saw them have a chance. They would need Denmark subsequently in Seville to lose to Spain. And unfortunately for Ireland, their fans probably would have been upset because they learned that Michael Laudrup of Denmark was tripped up in the box by Subisarreta, the Spanish goalkeeper. And the weird how Subisarreta and Laudrup were actually club teammates at Real Madrid. So Spain lost their goalie. Obviously, they had to make a replacement. And Canizares came in. And Canizares had one of the best games he's ever had as a Spanish goalkeeper. And somehow, in some way, Spain scored a late goal by Fernando Hierro, who was a Spanish hero at the time. Spain beat Denmark 1-0 and kept the Euro champions out of the World Cup. Denmark would be upset, of course, because, that goal was kind of awkward. Ireland and Denmark actually had the same record, 7 wins, a loss, and 4 ties in the 12 matches, qualifying games in that group. But the problem was, Ireland and Denmark had the same goal differential at plus 13, which meant the next tiebreak is goals scored. And Ireland put up 19, whereas Denmark put up 15. Despite Denmark only giving up that goal to Hero of Spain and one other one in the qualification group, Denmark were out. Peter Schmeichel got robbed, and I know he did. And Denmark kind of got robbed. But, them's the breaks. Ireland would then shock Italy in the first game of their group stages before falling in the round 16. But the number one European story for the 94 World Cup has to be France and their choke job. France was in a group with Sweden, Bulgaria, Austria, Finland, and Israel. And France looked pretty good. Despite losing in Bulgaria 2-0, they took care of Austria 2-0. They hosted Finland and beat them 2-1. They went to Israel and crushed them 4-0. They went to Austria and beat them 1-0. Then they hosted Sweden and won 2-1. Before going to Sweden and tying those guys. And then going to Finland and winning 2-0. France in their final 2 games had 1 goal in mind. All France needed was 1 point in their final 2 games to qualify for the World Cup. That's all they needed to do. Which was shocking. But yeah, it happened. France just needed 1 point against Israel or Bulgaria. That's all they needed. And Israel, the team that they crushed 4-0 in Israel, was coming to the Parc des Princes. So it looked like it was going to be easy peasy lemon squeezy for the French. That's all they needed. Well, Israel came up fast. Harassi scored to make it 1-0. But France would score a pair of goals by Saucy and Genoa. Ooh, Genoa. Cool. So it's 2-1 France. So France just needed to hang on. Unfortunately, in the 83rd minute, a goal by Berkovic made it 2-2. No big deal. France needed a point. With both games on home turf, all they needed to do was hold on to the ball. But in the 90th minute, a late goal by Ruben Attar. Need a card? Called Ruben Attar. Made it 3-2, and Israel somehow, in some way, beat the French. So France was like, what the heck happened? But that was not the end of it, because France just needed a point against Bulgaria on home turf on November 17th. That was the only game played on that day in that qualification group. France got out to a quick start by a goal by Eric Cantona. Cantona. I say, Cantona. I know, that was before his days at Man U. But yeah, he made it 1-0 to France. No big deal. France scored. And then Konstantinov scored to make it 1-1. However, France had a chance to run down the clock and kick it by the corner flag. But Genoa decided to take a shot instead of putting it to the corner flag, killing the clock, and possibly giving France the point they needed to qualify. Bulgaria counterattacked, and then a few passes later, Konstantinov scored a goal over Lamas' left shoulder. And it's 2-1 Bulgaria. They had just qualified alongside their friendly rivals. So somehow, in some way, the French were out of the World Cup. Bulgaria sunk them, and France would not qualify. Fortunately, though, this would be the last time France would miss the World Cup. And, well, they had a chance in 98 because they hosted the World Cup. They got revenge by winning the World Cup. But, yeah, 94 was just a shocking development of things to come. Every continent had a story of a team missing the World Cup rather than making the World Cup. But, you got to make a shot. It's a Star Wars trope. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Thanks for watching.